Welcome to the SDG Media Zone at South by Southwest in Austin, sponsored by SAP. This afternoon's panel is called Thinking People-Centric, Improving Trust and Culture. My name is Lance Gould. I'm the editorial director of Earth's Call, and with me today on the panel is Kirsten Allegri Williams, CMO, SAP SuccessFactors, Mark Mitchell, Managing Director, HR, Shared Services at American Airlines, and Dr. Alaa Murabit, a medical doctor, a UN High-Level Commissioner for Health and Economic Growth, and one of 17 global SDG advocates, one of 17 appointed by the Secretary General. So welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
The SDGs are a wide-ranging blueprint for global peace and prosperity. As many watching this panel will already know, they map out strategies for creating a sustainable future for the planet. And while much of the attention for the SDGs has gone to environmental issues, such as climate change and biodiversity, there are numerous workplace issues covered by the SDGs, particularly with regard to SDG 3, good health, number 5, gender equality, number 8, decent work and economic growth, number 9, industry, innovation, and infrastructure, and number 10, reduced inequality. Today's panel will do a deep dive on these SDGs and focus on what the UN and 2 companies in particular are doing to address them, creating healthy, egalitarian workspaces that look after the well-being of their employees and that have healthy work cultures. So let me start off by asking Kirsten and Mark to describe the work culture at your respective companies and how you weave the SDGs into the fabric of the culture at SAP and American Airlines, respectively.
Do you want to start, Mark?
Sure, happy to. Thanks, Kirsten, and thanks, Lance. It's a great question. So American Airlines is about 5 years into our merger with US Airways. And the first 3 years were all about bringing the new company together, but the last couple of years have been keenly focused on building the people-centric culture that we need as we go forward. We have an overarching mission statement that we have evolved to, which is to care for people on life's journey. And I hope during the conversation today you can see how that connects very nicely to very much the United Nations SDGs. We have 3 very specific objectives to deliver against that caring for people on life's journey. One of those is to make culture a competitive advantage. Another one is to create a competitive customer experience. And thirdly, to build an American Airlines that thrives forever, which again, I think is a very nice fit as we talk about unfold today, the conversation around United Nations and the SDGs.
And just to interrupt for 1 second, when you said you wanted to make culture a competitive advantage, can you go into a little bit of detail on that?
Absolutely. So at American, some of the attributes that are helping us think and drive and change the mindset around culture is A, to be very inclusive, to ensure that we have the right diverse talent on the team to drive American's mission forward, and to be very collaborative. Those, I would say, are the 3 most important attributes that are helping us think about how we deliver against that and the culture that we're trying to create.
And I think that probably is reflected not only in the company, but that's a reflection of the customer base that you'd like to have as well.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, we have 160 local chapters of what we call employee business resource groups. And those employee business resource groups are an extension of 20 core chapters. Those employee business resource groups allow employees within American to find a community that they can connect with, be it of ethnic diversity, a social cause, be it sexual orientation, a religious affiliation. And by having those 160 groups together, they're helping us be more representative and think about not only the communities and the customers, but the countries that we serve globally at American Airlines.
That's wonderful, Mark. And at SAP, we really believe, Lance, that a best-run world comes from best-run companies like American Airlines, who's one of our customers. And SAP's mission and purpose is to help the world run better and improve people's lives, and that technology can be an enabler for that. At SAP SuccessFactors, we help organizations work through how they need to become a best-run workforce, where they can harness the talent and the skills of their people in a way that can safeguard their humanity at work and productivity, but also in a way that allows businesses to grow and increase profitability and business performance. And so some of the things we do at SAP SuccessFactors, we have innovations that we help that really support around decent work and economic growth, reduced inequalities with what we do on eliminating bias in communications and the way we hire and evaluate talent, as well as health and well-being with other solutions that we use to incorporate how people can take the essential microsteps that they need to have in their daily work to bring their best selves to work, as well as technology to address gender equality and issues like the pay gender equity gap. So lots of innovation there, but technology can be an enabler to fuel the way companies operate and help them achieve their mission and create the culture that they desire, like Mark was describing at American Airlines.
Thank you, for both of you, for giving those insights of what these huge companies have in terms of establishing cultures. Alaa, as one of the Secretary General's global SDG advocates, you travel the world and are eyewitness to a huge variety of cultures. What are the common themes you come across in your travels, and what is it that vis-a-vis work, and what is it that workers crave universally?
I think that's a wonderful question. I think, it's incredible to see how similar and how different we are at the same time. And when we go around the world and we look at a lot of different people in their workplace, in their communities, oftentimes most employees, most entrepreneurs, most leaders really want one thing. And I think that's a sense of feeling needed and a sense of purpose, and to feel as though their contributions are seen and felt and heard. And so I always get kind of into this debate with some friends when they say, no, it's about the bottom line. And I'm like, I really don't think it is. I think you keep employees engaged. I think you keep companies engaged by saying we're actually driving to something much bigger than American Airlines or SAP. And we're really transforming the way in which we engage with each other as people. And so I do think there's some things that we can take globally. If you look at any industry or any space, I mean, healthcare is a very good example, where we're now for the first time seeing, because of technology, because of globalization, because people are realizing maybe the way we've always done it isn't the right way, that there's something they can learn from countries around the world. And so for the first time, we're seeing this merge of kind of Western and Eastern medicine, right? And we're seeing all of these different things where people are a lot more open to this. And people in their own local community, be it local healers, be it local doctors, are also feeling a lot more capable and vocal to say, listen, we do things a little differently, but we'd love to learn and share. So I think we've seen a lot more collaboration. We've seen a lot more openness in that regard. But I think underlying any great economic strategy is definitely driving that your employees need to feel needed, and they need to feel appreciated both by their local community but also by the company. And if you can do that well, then you can retain.
Are there any specific examples from the health field aside that you can think of from overseas that we could really use as lessons here in the United States workplace cultures?
Well, I think so it's not necessarily, I don't think it's an either or, I think it's an and, right? And so a very good example is Unilever's work. Unilever was in a local community, I believe in Nigeria, and I apologize if that's incorrect, but I believe in Nigeria, and they noticed that their chicken stock cubes were selling off the shelves. And they also noticed through their CSR in that country that people had significant iron deficiencies. And so what they did was they went back at Unilever and they said, what can we do to actually deliver for this community? And it was local employees that said, is there a way to fortify your chicken stock? And so Unilever and the local Nigerian community came together and they fortified that chicken stock because of a lot of local leadership, but also because people at the highest levels in Unilever were willing to listen and were willing to recognize that a local challenge is a challenge for their local employees. And it does impact their local employees' ability to do their jobs and ability to go home to their families and say, my company stands behind this community more than to just sell to it, but to benefit to it. So I think that's a fantastic example.
It is a fantastic example. I love the granular detail of that. That's amazing. Kirsten and Mark, you're an HR veteran, and Kirsten, you're a CMO in the HR space. And you both know a great deal about what companies need to do to keep employees happy. These days, there are indicators that both employees and customers want to attach themselves to brands that stand for something. What are your observations about how purpose can make employees happy? And what have you observed in your own companies about how employees feel about their employers' commitments to social good and the SDGs?
Yeah, happy to. Yeah, thank you. I think that's a very relevant question, Lance, especially, and certainly at American Airlines. And when I hear mission, I hear purpose. Very, very recently, we came out of our leadership conference, and the mission, the internal mission that we care for people on life's journey became real. And we spent 5 different days, 6,000 leaders, bringing them into our corporate offices to have a conversation, to help them understand if this is American Airlines wide, which, by the way, that American Airlines wide came from bringing in 130 team members across the globe, having conversation. It wasn't the CEO mandate. It came from our team. And it was validated and verified through 40,000 plus employee survey responses to get us to where we are. So it came from our team. And I think if you look at the activities that we took place in over those 4 days, bringing teams in across the globe and having them understand their why, like what's your purpose? Why do you exist? What's important to you? And have them go through an activity with their peers to connect their why, their mission, their purpose to the company's mission. When people realize where they fit in, how they fit in, when they realize that they are valued by their employer, they're valued, their voice is valued, it really begins to connect the dots. And that's so important for us, because for us to create the world-class customer experience that we want to we have aspirational goals to achieve, it starts with our people. So that connecting the dots starts with the people culture matters, and it will eventually drive to us all of our business objectives, but certainly the world-class customer experience that we're striving to create.
Yeah, and at SAP, I mean, just to pivot off of what you said, Mark, thinking about the importance of employee culture and the type of culture that leadership is encouraging to inspire. At SAP, we have a very strong culture of employee engagement and employee empowerment and a focus on personal leadership where every single person within the company is empowered to innovate. We're a technology company, so ideas can come from anywhere. And having the type of culture where 96,000 employees are able to bring strategic initiatives to a leadership level, get sponsorship, and then be able to mobilize the right resources, technology, and teams to be able to support that initiative. One of the things that we've done at SAP is, for the 12th consecutive year in a row, SAP has been recognized as a Dow Jones leader in sustainability index across social, environmental, and economic sustainability. It was something we're very proud of. And part of the culture is also being able to measure and be transparent about progress. And I think the important thing to think about with the UN SDG goals is progress over perfection is the goal. Mm-hmm. And it's important to take steps forward. So, when we think about moving the needle on gender equality, our board member, Jennifer Morgan, is a senior executive sponsor on ensuring it's not just a leadership initiative where in 2018 we were able to achieve our 25% goal of management roles being filled by women. And we've now set the goal of 30% by 2022. But having a leader like Jen, who's really at the forefront of that, it's not just about checking the box. We're actually building out innovation to help other companies be able to scale and provide insights into how well they're performing on promoting women in leadership or other gender-based insights that we need to create the transparency in order to drive action.
So you're making not only the moral case, but the business case as well.
Absolutely. And what we do in SAP, we also translate that value into our entire customer base and our entire partner ecosystem.
That's wonderful. It is important to note that today is International Women's Day, and we're here. I'm wearing purple to support International Women's Day and to support SDG 5, which is gender equality, of course. Kirsten, Mark, can you each tell us about what your organizations are doing to recognize women, both in the workplace and vis-a-vis the SDGs?
Absolutely. It's great to be here on National Women's Day. I did search my entire closet for purple. I found a purple wristband.
There you go.
It's the best I could do in my closet, so I'll work on my fashion for next time a little bit more effectively. But yeah, it's something at American that's highly relevant. So it starts with things like women in aviation and the level of importance American places supporting that organization within our own company, but also nationally and globally to promote the careers of women in aviation, be it a pilot, be it any level or any role within the company. Secondly, I think it comes to policy And having in 2017 and 18 rolled out some of the industry-leading policies for maternity programs and adoption programs to focus the role and understand the role of women in the workplace and their roles at home as well to drive families. We also, as you take that even one step broader, American Airlines partners with organizations like ECPAT USA. We want to make sure that the travel industry does not unwittingly in any way support or drive anything around human trafficking forward. We made sure during some of the recent news media around the border crisis that we had done training to bolster alliance awareness and compliance training for some 60,000 frontline team members to make sure that we weren't separating families at the borders. So there's a host of things that we find very relevant that are all trying to drive this forward in a way that's very important to us as well. So.
And at SAP, as I mentioned, we have the executive senior sponsorship around women in leadership, but also how that translates into, I'll talk a little bit about our partner ecosystem, where not only do we drive innovation within SAP, but we also partner with best-in-class startups and innovators that are working to address very specific challenges we have to foster the women in leadership and gender equality agenda. So for example, one company that we partner with is Cultivate, and they are really strong at being able to identify if there's any biased communications within email. So at an individual level, how are you communicating with men versus women as one insight? Many of us may not be aware of unconscious bias that may exist in the way we communicate. And so technology can be an enabler of being able to identify some insights so we can give the right training and coaching to our leaders and our teams and individuals. Another company that we work with is PayScale. They deliver insights around pay equity. So they have their own index, their research, benchmarks, so that they can help employers who want to address the pay equity gap and do it at scale. And so those are the kinds of things that, just from a culture perspective, we look at all sources of innovation, not just within our company, but across the whole ecosystem, because we have to move faster. The pace of change is moving so fast as we're all struggling with globalization, social change, competitive pressures, things that, especially in the HR space, these leaders are really struggling with. And we actually need technology to be able to enable the transparency and the insights of what might be fundamentally wrong or a root cause, and then be able to take the right actions that make topics like gender equality, pay equity, unconscious bias a part of core business, not just about a philanthropic effort or something that feels good. It's actually changing the way people work and the way they operate.
There's another SAP technology that reminds me of what you're talking about, but I want to come back to that in 1 second, because first I want to ask Alaa a question. Alaa, can you share with us the impact that, we're talking about International Women's Day still, share with us the impact that a UN-backed social awareness day like International Women's Day might have in some parts of the world where it could really make a difference, and that includes the United States?
So I think it's, there's been a lot of movement in the past couple of years in particular of really amplifying and elevating women's voices, particularly on International Women's Day. And while I am thrilled with that, I also think that should be something that's happening around the year. We should not have only one day where we celebrate the success of our companies in elevating women's voices, or our schools in really amplifying students, or our governments in amplifying women. It shouldn't be, the month of March where suddenly we see all these covers with incredible women, and the other and because it does two things that really frustrate me. The first is it makes it look like this is a favor. Like on March, we're going to put the women and we're going to tokenize the women. You're going to be on all the covers because it's International Women's Day. Not because you're incredible, badass leaders, but because it's International Women's Day. And so, when a young girl or a young guy reads it, they're like, oh, I guess March, International. And it's this assumed that you've been selected from a smaller pool of success. And it's a frustration for me. So I wish that could be mainstreamed throughout the year, and that companies can be a lot more public and vocal and really amplify the work they're doing. Because I love going on panels like this and talking about amazing companies. I now have two more I can add and say, this is what they're doing to amplify women's voices. This is what they're doing to ensure women's leadership. But there's two things I'll touch on here from a kind of economic perspective that I think are important for us. The first is we really do need to shift the language. Language is so incredibly powerful. And the fact that companies can still get away with saying things like it's philanthropic or CSR, for me, is no longer acceptable. We know that it's not a favor to do something like maternity leave. It actually makes your company so much stronger in the long run, and it actually is so much better for your bottom line. We know that investing in employees' healthcare, investing in their rights, supporting them when they say, listen, you know, a very good example, both in the US and abroad, is women's reproductive rights. The fact that a lot of women around the world cannot feel entirely in control of their bodies negates a lot of other opportunities of leadership and power for them. And until companies stand up and say, not only are we going to give you maternity leave, but hey, if you need a wellness day, we are going to adapt to the ecosystems that we have around us, and we're going to support the communities we have to create stronger, stronger companies, economies, and, to be quite frank, a stronger level of trust, because right now that globally is what we've seen deteriorate. There are a lot of citizens around the world that feel like companies don't have their best interest, governments don't have their best interest, technology doesn't have their best interest, and they begin to ask, really, who has my back other than me? And so we've seen rates of voting in elections go down. We've seen rates, if you look at the Edelman Trust survey, we've seen the amount of trust people have in their government and in companies has deteriorated. And so we have to begin to ask ourselves, what services are we not providing to men and women? Mm-hmm. What are we not doing? And how can we do it better? And in those surveys, in conversations with the average person, they'll say, I really want my kids to have a better life than I did. And that means we need to do a lot better on education, which we know gets more girls. If you educate 10% of the girls in a country, you're growing that country's GDP by 2 to 3%. And if we were to equally educate and employ girls around the world, we would have a greater economic growth than China and India combined. Those are economic statistics. That's not feel-good stuff. That's a reality. So what are we doing about girls' education in the countries we fly to, or in the countries we work in, or in the areas where we're getting these employees? What are we doing about getting more women in tech? I mean, the United States is one of the most developed countries in the world. How are we at a 30% rate for STEM? It's incredible that we're having these conversations about women's leadership because, and I'll close on this, I think there is this fallacy of exceptionalism for women leaders. That if you are a woman and you're a leader, it's because you are this exceptional Wonder Woman superhero, and it does a disservice to young girls at home who are also have the potential to be these incredible superhero women who may not have had the same opportunities you did, or the same role models you did, or the same people supporting them that you did. And I think what we need to do is we need to elevate the women who have done incredible work and make role models out of them. The mom who went back to work after 20 years of raising her kids at home, or people who have done. That's Lila Igram. She's the CEO of Connect Her, and it's an amazing organization you should all look into. They do something called the Girls Impact the World Film Festival, where they, 12 and 13-year-old girls are sending in these amazing videos from around the world, from Bangladesh to Texas, really talking about what impacts them. And I think if we're able to stand by those everyday superheroes, the people who are transforming the communities around us, we're able to actually systemically ensure women's rights. It becomes structural. It doesn't become a feel-good thing. It doesn't become a quota. It doesn't become reactionary because of whatever is happening politically. It becomes something that even if the political tide changes, even if the social tide changes, even if the cultural tide changes, women can still reach to positions of power and maintain those positions of power. Not optics, not tokenism, but power. That's what we need.
Is there a country or a culture we can look to that has some granular examples that you admire, that you feel can be a model for us to look to?
I think, so I am both very critical and very optimistic at the same time. I do not think there is a single country around the world that has reached what we need to on women's rights. I think you can point to countries for individual successes they've had. So, a lot of people say Scandinavian countries. And my next question there is, well, how do they treat minority women, right? Because it's intersectional. It's not just, women aren't one kind of monolithic thing, right? We have to ask, how are we actually working in those details of those realities? I do think the positive side there, the optimistic side, is everybody is trying a lot harder than they ever have been before. My hope is that trying turns into action, that trying turns into tangible structural change where we completely transform foundations and companies start looking internally and saying, wait a second, what are we not doing enough of in the countries we're working in, not only for our own employees, but also people we benefit from? I think that needs to change, but I'm incredibly optimistic about where it can go.
As a father of two amazing young women who are both attending university, I'll just say yes. Thank you. Yes. I hope that is what they get to experience, and they have that same passion that you do and can make a difference. So thank you for all your words. That was awesome.
Thank you very much.
What are the biggest obstacles to actually achieving equality in the workplace?
So I'll pivot off of what you were just saying and thinking about, first off, the role of education and how a recent PwC study was released where 3% of exiting female college graduates from universities, they cited technology as their number one choice, 3%. And some of the reasons why they stated only 3% is because they didn't understand what a career in technology could look like, and that they also had a perception that it felt like it just wasn't creative enough. And so to your earlier point about championing the women in leadership and being able to show the path forward to the next generation of the workforce coming up, it's incumbent on us to be able to show just how invigorating and dynamic and creative our industry really is. The second piece is around really tangible things that we need to activate in terms of core business. Because I firmly believe and agree with you 100% that we can't treat these topics as a CSR initiative. It's about changing core business. And so, in McKinsey's 2018 Women in the Workplace study that was released, they found that the biggest challenge for women at a critical point in their career is getting their first level management position, where out of 100 men who are promoted, only 79 women are. When you think about that at scale, then the gap between women in leadership becomes exponential as you go up the ranks. And so therefore the women at the top become fewer and far between. And that's certainly the case within the technology space. And so, thinking about that, how do we take technology to then be able to enable decision-making and insights of where are we with our first level managers who are ready for promotion, and where are they in their career? How do you bring that insight across an entire organization so that you can give the right learning, coaching, mentoring? And it's something that we've done through the Unconscious Bias, Business Beyond Bias initiative that we lead through SAP SuccessFactors, where we create technology like our job analyzer tool, where we're able to scan the way job descriptions are written and be able to take out biased language out of descriptions, which we have seen through our statistics that discourage women to actually apply for those roles. So there's even things that the way we communicate, there's just some unknown things that need to, the level of awareness needs to be raised, the transparency, but then you can create that insight and then actually change the way you make decisions, change the way you operate, and that becomes much more scalable and sustainable because it's not a one-off. It's not one day in the year. It's how we're changing core business and the way we operate.
Such a critical part of the process.
Yes.
Mark, you work for an airline which is heavily dependent on fossil fuels, essential to its business model, which is something we have to mention in an SDG panel. Is there a corporate culture at American Airlines that recognizes that and discusses that in terms of the SDGs? And does American take that into account in terms of giving back to the community or in terms of addressing its social good responsibilities?
Absolutely. Thanks for the question. At American, I think it's safe to say that we are a company that looks at running a global business is truly a global responsibility. I think something I heard Alaa say earlier is many times corporations or governments may see as an either or. We see these things as an and. They're both relevant. They are supportive of each other. And so going on to the green part, the environment part of it, first of all, we have invested the last 7 years to have what is now the youngest fleet in the industry, which is also the most fuel-efficient fleet in the industry. We have had fuel-smart programs in place for over a decade. In fact, when our fuel-smart savings reach a certain threshold, a portion of those savings go right to the Gary Sinise Foundation, which provides donations and real dollars to veterans, to first responders, and their families. Secondly, or thirdly, we also have a procurement team that's focused on sourcing the most environmentally friendly parts we can find to operate our facilities, to run our fleet. We partner with the Aircraft Recycling Association. So instead of discarding old aircraft parts, we recycle them. So there's a host of things that we are doing very consciously to be green, to stay green. And just one more thing, last year, I believe it was actually 2017, we recycled over 400,000 pounds of aluminum just from our flight attendants on board efforts for aluminum cans. So absolutely.
Do I have time for one more question? All right. I know we're running. I have so many more questions, but I want to wrap up on this. On International Women's Day, which is one day of the year, I recognize, but as this day affords us the opportunity to at least put this out there into the ether of a discussion, how can men best be allies to women in the workplace and in society? What can we do? How can you instruct us? How can we be better?
Oh, I like this question. I'm so glad you ask it. I really am. I think it's not just what men can do, it's what we can all do, but I'm going to focus on men since you asked. I think it's a kind of unspoken truth that in most of our companies, the vast majority of management is male-dominated, right? And a lot of the policies are reflective of male life experience. So that's why maternity leave hasn't been such a huge issue in a lot of companies. It's not something that that managerial staff has ever really had to face. And as we've seen with changing economies, those conversations are now changing. The reality of double-income households, the reality of a lot of men choosing to stay at home and raise their children. And what I think would be incredible, and what I recommend to every single person I know, but particularly men, is when you are in a room and you're having a conversation, look around the room and intentionally ask who is not here.
Who is?
Not here. Who is not in this room? Because I don't think it's deliberate. I don't think it's malicious, but I do think we need to be a lot more aware of who's missing from the conversation. And today, when you all go home, sit down and ask yourselves about one woman in your own life, a rock star, somebody you know who is capable, who can actually lead in your company, and begin to sponsor her to that space. Because we don't have, the reality is, like you said, 79 women for every 100 men for the first managerial position. By the time you get to the top, you're looking at 2 to 3%, right? And so if you're working at American Airlines and you know there's a young woman who's doing incredible work but is being overlooked because of those unconscious biases, adopt her. Literally, start sponsoring her work. Start talking about, we should get her in this meeting. She has some really great points. Start elevating her work. Start amplifying her work. Ask her to go to speak on panels. Really make it a priority in your own day-to-day life, because we're not all going to, I don't think we're all going to transform the world in a day. I don't. But I do think what transforms the spaces we work in and what transforms the conversation is the actions that we can individually take and the responsibility we have for them. So if you know that something is happening in your company or that there is somebody who has been overlooked, and ask them, because a lot of women won't tell you. They won't tell you that they applied for that managerial job and they didn't get it. But if you go and say, hey, can we have a conversation? Have you considered this? And they say, I did. I applied last year. You can say, well, let's see what went wrong. Let's make this happen. Let's get you in those meetings. Let's talk to those people. Leverage your platform. Leverage your experience. Leverage your seniority. Leverage your network. Leverage your credibility. Leverage everything to get somebody else in the room.
Great. Any thoughts on that?
I do. I think where I find the link between women and sustainability is if you think about sort of pivoting the conversation with men and raising the awareness and thinking about the importance of women's consumer purchasing power and influence. Women control 75% of all global consumer purchasing spend, either by our direct control or by our influence. I'm sure the ladies in the room will understand what I'm talking about. And so if you think about that role of women's voices to be heard around the room on topics that we care about, transparency in the supply chain. Is there forced labor or child labor in the supply chain? How is a business operating? I assure you, consumers will reward brands, and we've done studies on this. 52% of consumers will reward brands if they are more open and transparent about their business operations. So think about the pivot of conversation of what can women bring to the table that changes the conversation in the room on how do we need to think differently about how we run our business? How can we make that transparent to consumers? Because there is a direct tie to profitability and growth when you harness the insights that women really have in your product development, in the types of goods and services you offer. There's a lot of value there in opening that conversation. And the second thing I'd say is just on a very practical level is being able to be open when a female colleague reaches out for mentoring and coaching. I mean, I've learned a lot from the male leaders that I've really embraced and also made aware of, hey, there was an issue that I had with a particular conversation where I felt like there was a gender bias in the conversation. Help me navigate through that. What should I do to improve that situation? And so I do think, just practically speaking, being able to encourage the relationship between men and women in a coaching and executive sponsorship is really valuable. I've learned so much from my male colleagues and leaders who've helped me progress in my career. So,
Lance, I have to just add one important thing just on mentorship. I wholeheartedly agree with you, but I will say one thing, because it is International Women's Day and we are talking people-centric and improving trust and culture. I would not be here today. I would argue you probably wouldn't be here today, but I definitely wouldn't if it had not been for women leaders who sponsored me, who mentored me, who, despite very tenuous positions, because it's not structural, they don't maintain that leadership and that authority always, and they just got it themselves, would put out a limb and make sure that I was in those rooms and I was in those spaces. So first, to all the women leaders who are in positions of managerial power, thank you for continuing to do that work and continuing to open the door for other young women. And if you're not, consider looking in your company and saying, who can I mentor? Who can I work with? Because there is this fallacy that women do not support women. And I will tell you, the single most supportive people in my life have been women. And until we make that clear, that that is not a wedge, that's not something you can divide young women on, then I think it'll actually change for a lot of women in positions of power who say, you know what, I'm going to make this my mission as well.
Well, to echo your thanks to those women leaders who came before you, I want to thank the three of you for having such illuminating comments on this panel today. Really appreciate it. It was really inspiring conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much.